Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for Renaissance Periodization. Today's video will be asking the question of when should you use intensity techniques like myoreps and drop sets and supersets versus when you should do straight sets, just like sets of 8 or 10 or 12, rest a normal amount of time, and then begin another set close to failure. So here's the thing, straight sets really are the default in training and should compose most of your training. Why? Because your faster fibers, your fastest twitch motor units, grow the most from training, and straight sets allow you to make sure that your faster fibers are stimulated in each set and then relax and rest so that the next set again pushes them close to failure. If you had, let's say, one continuous set of 50 reps where you started with your 1 rep max and then some kind of machine adjusted to the next one is your 2 rep max, and the next is your 3 rep max, and the machine automatically lowered your load all the way to the last one is, let's say, your 30 rep max, right? So every set is close to failure. After about, gee whiz, 10 reps, your fastest twitch fibers are just off. They're just not doing anything anymore. And the rest is really just slow twitch fibers. So if you just did, instead of 5 sets of 10, if you did a set of 50 reps all the way to failure with the load adjusted automatically all the way through, the percent of faster twitch growth from that would be quite small. The first set of 10 would be decent. After that, garbage. But for the 5 sets of 10, because you get breaks, every time you get to hit your faster fibers anew. This is also helped by the fact that systemic factors get a chance to recover between straight sets. As you're doing your 25 RM, it's really not your 25 RM anymore. If you were fresher, it's your 25 RM, having done all of the other RMs before that. So your systemic fatigue is now crazy high. Your brain's ability to really tell your muscles to go with all the pain and the lactic acid and so on and so forth, and just the nerves literally run out of the raw materials with which they send their signals, you end up going to nervous system failure before you actually hit local muscle failure. So the muscles themselves are not getting as stimulated, not getting as recruited nearly as they could be. But if you did a hard set and then took a break, your systemic fatigue falls. And the potential for you to, on the next set, really hit your target muscles close to their failure is way higher. So if you do exclusively like the ultimate drop set intensity technique, then it's just not very efficient to get your fastest twitch fibers fresh over and over and over to stimulate the most possible growth, right? That's why straight sets generally are a really good idea, but intensity techniques, so to speak, myoreps, drop sets, agonist supersets, occlusion and stuff, they can work really well just under certain circumstances. So when are those circumstances? When are intensity techniques okay to use? Here we go. Number 1, this is a list of, first of all, so number 1 and 2 are requirements. Number 1 for sure. Number 2 you'll see is mostly a requirement. Numbers 3 and 4 are suggestions to get better result. Number 1 is a requirement, and here it is. When you're using on a certain muscle or certain exercise, an intensity technique like a drop set or superset, it has to pass the 4-factor rest checklist we've talked about in other videos. What do we mean by that? Your later sets, for example, in myoreps, every single myorep set after the first set of, let's say, 10 to 20 has to be above 5 reps. If you start dropping in your sets below 5 reps, they're not adequately hypertrophic. If you're doing a cable extension to push-up superset and you do a set of 10 cable extensions and then a set of 2 push-ups, that set of 2 push-ups is really just not doing a whole lot. So as long as each one of the sets, the first part of the superset and the second part is at least 5 reps, you're good to go, okay? So it has to meet the 5-rep checklist. If you're doing drop sets or myoreps or anything like that, and you're doing sets of 1 or sets of 2, no good, okay? It has to be at least 5. Next, the exercise cannot be limited by your cardio abilities. It has to be limited by local muscle fatigue. So drop sets of squats are stupid. I've done them before. They're stupid. Why? Because after the 3rd drop set of squats, you're just, and you're limited by your ability to breathe and get oxygen to the working tissues and to get wastes out and not the actual local muscles failure point and fatigue. However, so drop sets on squats, intensity techniques on squats, as you'll notice from most people's experience, almost everyone squats in straight sets because you need the rest, right? It turns into cardio after a while. What kind of exercises, though, can continue to be limited by the local muscle, even though you're not taking long rest breaks, as is typical with intensity techniques? Well, let's say cable curls. Who the hell runs out of oxygen on cable curls, right? You go super close to failure, oof, and then your training partner takes it down and, puts it in the next rack again, and you go, hey, another set of 6. Okay, and then you're not running out of air the entire time because the biceps just don't generate a whole lot of systemic fatigue. They don't require a whole lot of metabolites to be sequestered for your entire body. It's not a big deal. But it's a case-by-case basis. Can you do machine rows? That's up to you. Some people, they'll cardio out on machine rows with a drop set. For some people, it's totally fine. If you're really high body fat, you might not be able to handle a cardio. If you're really low body fat, you might. So this changes. Just make sure you're honest with yourself. When you're pushing your target muscle hard with intensity techniques, your failure is getting close because the target muscle is no longer willing to contract for you because they're really zapped, not because your cardio is off. Next one is the neural component. In general, this includes both physical ability of the nervous system to act and psychology. If you're basically not trying hard anymore on a drop set because your brain's just like, ugh, like we're done, that's not good. It's better to rest, really get your mojo back psychologically and hit another fucking hard set. But if the entire time during a drop set, you're psychologically in it, no problem, and you don't feel this just sense of total body fatigue and inability to even get your muscles to be going, then, you're totally good to go, right? So again, it's a personal judgment. If you feel like a drop set of squats just zaps your psychology and you're just not trying because of the incredible pain or the incredible total fatigue, drop set of squats not a great idea. But if you're doing drop sets of forearm curls and you're just in the entire time and your muscles are what's limiting you and it hurts locally, but you're driving, no big deal. Drop sets and stuff like that are totally fine. Lastly, are synergists getting in the way and are they failing before other muscles? The easy example here is squats. If you try to do drop sets of squats, right, what ends up happening is your lower back tires usually before your legs do, and that becomes a limiting factor. You rack the weight, you're like, oh, I'm done. I can't do any more reps with this load. And someone's like, quads, right? And you're like, actually, my lower back, right? I'm just starting to round over. I can't do this. My back is seizing up on me. That's not good, right? But in, let's say, machine rows, or here's another even better example. Super high back-to-back, drop sets or myo reps of bent rows, after a while, it's just your spinal erectors. You can't even get in position anymore. So your lats and your rhomboids and teres major, the targets of your actual training and your mid traps might be like totally fine, but your spinal erectors are like, we can't do this anymore. Which is why maybe drop sets and stuff like that are better on a machine row with a chest support. Your erectors are taken out of the equation, then you can take all the actual muscles to failure. So if you're asking yourself, is this exercise that I'm using conducive to intensity techniques? You have to ask, if I do the intensity technique, and sometimes if you don't know, you can try and say, okay, yes or no. But basically you ask, am I going to get at least sets of 5 on this, even in the breakdown mini sets? Is my cardio going to be a limiting factor? If not, okay. Is my neural, especially psychological ability going to be a limiting factor? Or can I crank out hard reps to the target muscle? And lastly, are synergists going to get in the way or are they not? If the case is that you pass all the 4-factor checklist, you're good to go. That exercise is conducive to doing intensity techniques. But if it doesn't, then it's not. You notice barbell rows, squats, overhead presses, bench presses, and stuff like that, they usually don't pass the 4-factor checklist if you're applying it to intensity techniques like occlusion or myo reps or drop sets or supersets. They only pass the 4-factor checklist if you're doing straight sets, which means they're better done with straight sets. But other exercises will do both, all right? And then you can do them as straight sets, like cable curls. You can do straight sets of cable curls, or you can do drop sets, occlusion, so on and so forth. That brings us to the next one. When you compare straight sets with an exercise versus the intensity techniques, which one tends to have the higher stimulus to fatigue ratio? Because it could be a thing that straight sets of cable curls are pretty good, but if you do myo reps of cable curls, they may even be better in stimulus to fatigue ratio, and then you definitely use it, but it should at least be comparable, right? You get a high tension and burn, pump and disruption in the target muscle when you do intensity techniques with this exercise versus straight sets, at least as good or close to as good. You have low joint and connective tissue fatigue. Your RP, rating for perceived exertion, isn't insane in relation to how much stimulus you're getting, and you don't get a ton of systemic spillover fatigue. Like there's another one where drop sets of squats take a huge hit. After a drop set of squats, you might be done for like 2 days lifting. Is it worth it? No. If you did 4 sets of regular straight sets of squats, you might get an even better quad stimulus and feel totally fine after. Definitely not worth it on that one, right? And here's the thing. Very often, the more faster fibers compose a certain muscle, the lower its SFR will be for intensity techniques and the better its SFR will be for straight sets. Hamstrings are very often a more faster twitch muscle for more people. How often do you hear about people doing drop sets for hamstrings, myo reps, supersets? It happens and sometimes it's effective. But like for stiff-legged deadlifts and good mornings and stuff like that, straight sets of like 8, fuck your hamstrings up more than anything in this world. Whereas like for more slower twitch muscles like rear delts or side delts, training side delts with no drop sets or supersets or anything like that, sometimes it's just like, I don't know, like it's actually better to train them with drop sets and supersets and stuff like that because it really zones in on them, because a lot of times they have higher, slower twitch muscle concentration, and the slower twitch fibers really do prefer the intensity techniques more than the faster twitch fibers do, and vice versa. Number 3, really good idea if you're going to do intensity techniques to do towards the end of a session. Why? Well, by the end of a session, the faster fibers have really just filled up on their growth stimulus completely because they actually have they have a higher sensitivity to growth, and they have a lower requisite volume, lower MAV, maximum adaptive volume. They just don't need as much work. But your slower twitch fibers may not have gotten as much work. And remember, these intensity techniques usually target the slower twitch fibers more than the faster twitch fibers. So at the end of the session, your faster twitch fibers are done anyway, and it's okay if they're not the limiting factor. Now it's time to really hit the slower twitch fibers up and get a complete stimulus. And you think, okay, but like these intensity techniques often cause crazy high levels of systemic fatigue and don't allow me to train hard after I do them. Like after, a bunch of myo reps, like you're done for the day. Well, that's okay if it's at the end of the session because you got to know where you're done, right? So don't do them at the beginning of a session, do them at the end. So that the faster twitch fibers have had all the work already. Now we hammer the slower twitch fibers, generate a ton of fatigue, and go home. Totally good idea. That's more of a recommendation, but it's not one that I would violate, okay? You could try it yourself. If you do a drop set of squats first in your workout, that's not a workout. If you do a drop set of leg presses at the end of your workout, proper exercise selection, that's actually a really good workout. You really put the hammer on the quads, and then you're good to go. And lastly, you probably want to do more of these things when you're doing the higher rep sets, more metabolite work towards the end of a training block. So in mesocycle 1 of a 3 mesocycle training block, you do these things, they generate a ton of fatigue, and also they don't tend to work for very long. They work really well for about a mesocycle, and then your body gets so much better at clearing lactate and buffering all the ions that it takes way, way, way more work to do the same thing. And you don't get as big of a pump, as much of a metabolite sequestration, and all that hypertrophy is not as impressive. We should probably save more of that stuff for like mesocycle 3 of a 3 meso progression, really put the hammer down, and then back off after. That's when lighter loads are employed anyway, and growth resistance is okay to max out because after a mesocycle of lots of intensity techniques, you just have nothing to give. Your body's very resistant to growth, and the systemic fatigue is super high. Good news, your next meso after is active rest or resensitization, where you bring your body back together and then grow again. So save this kind of stuff for not just the end of sessions, but the end of blocks of training. The last meso before you really take it easy is a good idea. Has to pass the 4-factor checklist, and more often than not, if you're asking yourself, should I do this next exercise, intensity technique style, like with myo reps or drops or something, or straight sets, ask which one of those is going to give you the highest stimulus to fatigue ratio and go with that. Folks, thanks for tuning in. See you next time.